Dear friends, today we, me and James, we are going to discuss very interesting topic about the future development of digital technologies and some changes in the social life. Today we are on the RVC Live during the Open Innovation Forum. My dear friends, from year to year, we are told and we repeat the world is changing. The world will never be the same. And each time these statements can be opposite to each other. Nevertheless, the objectivity is it follows. The 21st century is at the courtyard. The decade of heyday of digital technologies is outside the window. In recent years, technologies such IoT, big data, digital twins, AI, and others have entered our lexicon. We live on the internet. Social networks replace the real communication, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, and the quantity of smartphones are beyond number. However, I do not feel that the world has become happier or safer. On the one hand, the wake of development of these technologies, the concepts of smart cities, digital regions, and so on is developing, not in words, but in deeds. And life is becoming more convenient. It even allows us, ordinary citizens, to get along with bureaucracy comfortably. Here in Russia, and I really hope, James, in the UK too. And what is real amazing thing, I'm clear apologist for the technologies. I live them, I adore them. I dream that all technologies and technological devices are compatible and integrable. But sometimes I'm not so sure that all these technologies make the world a better place. Moreover, James, I feel that the world is not a safe place anymore. Let's take a look at the global 500 numbers that we see at the top of the list. All on A, Amazon, Apple, AT&T, Alphabet. We can say that their business is built on the data and working with data. But there are also pharmaceutical and financial corporations. James, do you agree with the cliche of our time, which everyone around constantly repeats, that the data is the new oil?
No, I don't at all. I always resist metaphors, and I can think of nothing sillier than to imagine that oil, which now gets an unfairly bad press, including Russian oil, has now been replaced and trumped, if I may use that word, by data, as the Amerikanski have it. It's not true at all, for the simple reason that if you do your homework, you'll find that actually a rather clever English mathematician called Clive Humby, he was the architect of the great retailer Tesco and their club card. He didn't build Tesco, he built the electronic data capture system around this very big supermarkets, credit cards and not credit cards, but their store card. And he said, it's important to know this, Nikita, data is just like crude. This is what he said in 2006. Nobody knows this. Data is just like crude oil. It's valuable, but if unrefined, it cannot really be used. It has to be changed into gas, plastic, chemicals, etc., to create value that drives profitability. So data must be broken down, analyzed for it to have any value. So in fact, all of the four firms you mentioned, they do use data. They're not built on data. They have to employ a lot of analysts and clever people to make something of the data, just like the oil industry has to employ refineries and plastics plants and all the rest of it. So it's a foolish metaphor, it's a foolish analogy. The people haven't done their historical homework, where the guy who coined the phrase exactly contradicted it when he coined it. and said, no, it's not the new crude. You have to do stuff to it. Now, as it happens, I identify Amazon, obviously, with software and Amazon Web Services, but I also identify it with logistics, very importantly, Nikita. Apple, software, yeah, but we all know about the hardware. AT&T, it's a few years since I had a look at them. And Alphabet, you could say that Google is all based on data, and it is. But at the same time, this week comes news that they have censored an important declaration by many scientists. It's called the Barrington Declaration. You don't have to agree with it to take a critical attitude to some of the lockdown measures that some countries have taken at various moments in time. And Google, in its wisdom, because it is a kind of new government in its own domain, has decided that this is misinformation, false news, false data. So although it bases its business on data, it's quite prepared to deny you and me the data when it sees fit. And you'll see the same with Facebook. So I think I'm dying to comment on your introduction, Nikita. I think the thing to bear in mind are just two principles for Russians who are serious about IT, right? The first is to avoid technological determinism, to not believe that IT alone, or any technology, it's not the only one, alone determines the future. We determine the future. Right? We determine the choice of technologies and how we prioritize them. And the second thing is, I think your criticisms of IT are fair enough, but we know, don't we, that many people are really horrible about IT, and sometimes the same people are really ecstatic about IT. They are either the positive version of technological determinism or very catastrophic. I think the Russians understand the Greek there, catastrophe. They have this really doom-laden view, and I think what we need is a critical attitude, not in the sense of throwing mud at IT, but really understanding its potential and its limitations. People don't do that anymore.
Oh yeah, it's probably unbelievable, but here in Russia we are tech positive.
Right.
We really believe in the technologies, and many people live in internet. The startup activities is very popular right now. But anyway, okay, let's come back to data. Correct data on people helps to optimize transport flows, level of production, many other things. But who is the main beneficiary of this at the end? People or corporations? Or in other way, I can ask you, like, who is the main beneficiary of this at the end? Like some kind of ecosystems, or some kind of probably just governments?
Well, it's a good question. I think IT and data, you need the hardware, the software, and the data, and the telecommunications can help optimize production in factories and elsewhere. I'm less certain, Nikita, that it can optimize transport flows. And I take issue with your remark in your introduction that smart cities are happening in fact. I don't believe they are happening, because the silos between different urban functions, collecting litter, parking fines, transport flow control, the silos between the different hardware and software systems make it very difficult. If you read the critiques of smart cities, you'll find that they are a top-down operation by Siemens and other people. And in many places, like in the Middle East, for example, they haven't happened. But what I do know about smart cities and the use of data to optimize transport flows is that it's just a mirage, because generally smart cities are about trying and failing to manage downwards transport demand. They are about sort of watching you. The surveillance aspect is very important, and then making it more difficult, more pricey, and more stigmatized for you to go certain places for free by car and things like that. So I would say the beneficiaries of the attempt to impose IT on transport are certainly not for motorists, maybe for cyclists now in the West, but I think they are more for the benefit of the IT suppliers and for posturing local governments, local administrations. We have plenty of them in England. If you take another example, does data help the process of retailing? The answer is yes. Do you and I see the use of IT in retailing really for our benefit a whole lot? Can we really say those checkout cards, those store cards, the automatic checkout, the trolleys, the price displays, the window displays, they're all reliant on data? The things that we interact with in retail really don't seem to involve a lot of IT. Behind them all, for the suppliers, there's a lot of IT about logistics, Amazon, supply chain, cold chain, refrigeration, and all of those things. But you and I don't see a whole lot of good coming out of IT in retail. So I think, it's not that IT doesn't do good stuff, it does. In a factory, it can do great stuff as long as the software is good. You and I have all printed out documents with errors in them, and we've had to reprint them. I hate to say that printing and errors are part of IT, but they are, and the same can happen in factories. You make one little glitch, you're going to get a whole line going wrong. So, it's terrific when it works. More and more right now, I'm finding, as merely a consumer, not business to business, which we need to remember, I'm finding IT doesn't work. My iPhone is so clever, it's become very difficult to use in lots of ways. So, are we the beneficiaries? To a certain extent. Could we be doing better in terms of user friendliness, user interface, price, and other things about IT and the way it's used? Yeah, we could be doing a lot better.
Okay, as I see, you're not so positive about the future of such a conception like smart city. So everything still be the same like 3 or 5 years ago, as I remember. But anyway, as humanity, we are all proud of the new technologies. But to be honest, with the release of each new car model or the appearance of the new iPhone, like you said, I have more and more doubts about the future of such society. In my point of view, society of consumption, which probably has destroyed the world of quality. What do you think about it?
Well, I don't agree about this focus on consumption. I think that we are not all consumers. You spend a lot of time at work, Nikita, while I enjoy a life of leisure. But I think there's much more to society than just consumers. If you go back to the debate between President Nixon and Nikita Khrushchev around 1960 in America, the very famous debate, which took place in front of washing machines and so on. That was when the idea of the consumer society really took off. It must have been after 1960, but after he was elected anyway, Nixon. So that was, it was before 1960. You better edit that part of the tape. But either way, consumer society really took off, and there's plenty of evidence that the whole discussion begins in the late 50s. Now, when we're looking at today, your levels of affluence in Russia are a little better than, the washing machine moment with Khrushchev in the 50s. So, obviously, it's easy to believe that you've entered a consumer society, and the rise of services tends to confirm that. At the same time, you and I know that, especially in Russia, business to business, business to government transactions are much more important, really, than consumption. GDP is anyway measured in terms of consumption. So no wonder consumption dominates GDP. But in the real world, you know, to get to one end of Moscow from another, you know, where is IT really helping right now when you're in the snow and you've got to go to from one part of your city to another? It's helping a bit, you know, temperature monitoring, sensing, traffic congestion sensing. They got some control rooms, some cameras, you know, and maybe it's helping a bit, but it's not exactly monorail, you know. It's not. And remember, we got to step outside IT. A monorail, you don't need a whole lot of IT to run monorail. You know, it could go from St. Petersburg to Ekaterina, you know, and you don't need a whole lot of electronics in principle. You need control systems, but you don't need, it should be fairly easy, you know, compared with locomotives. Right? Now, nobody's thinking about monorail because we don't have the optimism to do something like that. We're fighting an investment crash, which has been going on a long time, but is especially vivid in COVID. It's vivid in COVID. So, you know, we're not going to get a monorail, but that doesn't mean that we should either overestimate or underestimate the impact of IT. You know, we need other technologies beyond IT, and we need political will, not just optimism, but the belief that in a different way from Stalin, we can make a difference in terms of big projects, big ambitious projects, and ones that make a real difference to consumers, not a pretend difference, not a fake difference.
It's actually what I said. Just, you know, washing machine is great, and we're happy with that. But is it really the next big thing?
Oh no, you're quite right about that. No, well, that's then we're in agreement. It's just the English translation, right? One of the interesting things, just going to your point, to help your viewers out, is a big doctrine in the late 50s when consumer society started, and I will put this in my talk, is that, you know, in order to keep up levels of consumption, you had a thing called planned obsolescence. And one of the critiques of the iPhone is they're always trying to get you to buy a new model and to build in an obsolete moment for the old model. If you look at the numbers, the last time I looked, people are hanging on to their mobile phones much longer. They are not upgrading. I don't know why. Probably because there are too many features, too expensive. Now we've got the COVID crisis. So in fact, the theory of planned obsolescence, it goes back to the 1920s, but it shows that in fact, life is not what some ideologists would say. If anything, we need more and better consumption, not because it's a god. We also need better infrastructure, better quality air, obviously. And we need to reduce, as a priority, not the only priority, carbon emissions. So there's lots to do. But now I've forgotten what your question was.
Oh, yeah. But let's come back to technologies.
Yeah.
Right now, we are on the curve of technological development based on cyber-physical systems, let's say in a broad sense. When the resource of this stage of technological development will be exhausted, and where will this lead? What is the next?
Well, I think you're a bit ahead of yourself here, Nikita, and I think maybe your next question may have a kind of Nikita optimism in it as well, because it's the same question for me. You know, I don't really believe that we are on a strong upward curve of technological development, even in IT. And I put it to you in batteries, storage, quite a lot of medicine, I'm afraid, many other fields. There are some technological advances, but it's not all going famously. You know, there are different rates of advance. Now, I happen to agree that cyber-physical systems, in a broad sense, are coming, and that they are what other people understand as Industry 4.0. If you go to my website, I did some research on this. Industry 4.0 was very much a top-down World Economic Forum German initiative to combat China some years ago, because they could see what Chinese manufacturing was doing and where it was going. So they did put in some cyber physical systems, or at least they started talking about it. But, you know, if you read the literature on the Internet of Things, and then you realize how Industry 4.0 is even more sophisticated than the Internet of Things, because you're supposed to be able to run a factory in Sao Paulo, Brazil, from Moscow, you know, with Industry 4.0, because you've got digital twins and all of these things allowing you to do that. So Industry 4.0 is a lot more than the Internet of Things, and yet we're only beginning, Nikita, with the Internet of Things, right? The Economist a few years ago, before the COVID crisis, said that the completion of the Internet of Things, partly because of the silo problems that I was talking about before, would take 20 or 30 years, right? That's the Economist. I mean, that's kind of generally fairly gung-ho capitalism, you know. 20 or 30 years, that's for the Internet of Things. Industry 4.0, you're looking at 20 or 30 years, you know, at least, for it to really motor, right? And that's before the Chinese make a different internet system, or the, you know, Russians do. And it's before maybe quantum computing finally does assist a kind of balkanization of, I wonder whether this exists in Russian, you know, a balkanization of the internet. It was talked about a few years ago, I think with, you know, with, I wouldn't overdo it, but I think with Xi Jinping and Donald Trump, there's more impetus to that kind of, finally some real impetus there. So, you know, the compatibilities that you worry about are going to grow, and the silo problems are going to grow. You know, if you read McKinsey very early on about Internet of Things, I've been on an oil rig in the North Sea. I've been to the bottom of the North Sea, and I don't recommend it. But on a typical oil platform, you're dealing with about 200 suppliers with 200 kinds of technologies, and you don't want an explosion, and you want the Internet of Things to work, as the industry always says, seamlessly. You know, like an Italian tailor has never made you a seamless suit, but somehow an oil rig is going to, you know, and all of that. If you go down a leg to the bottom of the North Sea, which I have done, you'll know that with all the pumps going booga jugga, booga jugga, booga jugga, and there's a big danger of fire, you know, to re-equip that with sensors and to have the people that the Americans call data analytics, you know, where nobody can understand what they're saying, data analytics, you know, to analyze the oil rig data, you're going to need a team of 10 or 20 people on the top of the oil rig to make sense of it all, right? Just like you have now. So it's a non-trivial task. You're asking, hey, what comes after Industry 4.0? And my silly answer is Industry 5.0. But since we haven't even begun Internet of Things, we've begun Internet of Things, we're nowhere near Industry 4.0, even if that was the right conception. You know, the whole point about cyber physical systems is that, you know, one of the problems with IT, which we're learning about, is integrating it with the real world. You know, that's always been hard. When this Internet of Things broke, Michael Porter, the famous sage from Harvard, said, you know, all you manufacturers, you've got a lot to learn about IT. And my reply is exactly the opposite. All you IT people have got a lot to learn about manufacture, agriculture, biology, and all of that, because that's also part of the real world.